When I started talking with private clients about Zoom and the potential security issues associated with that platform, people didn't really take me serious. It was about in November, December, where I started, it was just uncharacteristic for a telecommunications company to make so many partnerships with so many different companies. But let me share with you, how would you know if somebody was spying in on your information, whether it is an insider threat or an outsider threat, and they were leaking details of your company? I'm Justin Hitt with Inside Strategic Relations. So this is a practical implementation of the concept of strategic relationships. The people that you work with, that you depend on, and that also depend on you, there has to be a certain level of trust. They're not going to pass along trade secrets or proprietary methods or information about activities that you're doing. And in many environments, this is critical and secured by your confidentiality agreement, your public trust your clearance, or any type of clearances. There's a lot of factors here that I won't go into depth. But what if the online meeting service that you were using had fatal flaws that allowed an external party, whether intentionally or unintentionally, to listen in on your conversations? How would you know this? Now let's get rid of Zoom meeting with video, Skype meetings, for Skype for Business, or all these other platforms, and just step back a little bit to the Red Scare of communist Russia. And the U.S. was concerned about Russian folks infiltrating the United States and listening into phone conversations. Let's skip that and go to the different political scandals that were related to people listening in on telephone conversations. Let's skip that and talk about unauthorized or illegal wiretaps. There's a lot of reasons why you may want to be careful about your electronic communications and be aware that those calls may be listened to by a third party, even if it's just the accidental message left about a candidate's social media activities, or a job candidate's social media activities that ends up on the news. So how would you know if someone is listening in on your conversations? Now, I'm in the business of risk management, and I get paid to be paranoid. And so I often wonder if someone else was listening in on this conversation, whether it was a compliance group, whether it was an outside party, whether it was an intentional party that's violating terms of agreement, or whether it was a configuration error that allowed a confidential message to be publicly available, how would I know? Well, here's one technique you can use that leverages personal perceptions in order to create a leak that's known, and this is in the intelligence community has a specific name. I don't have that off the top of my head. But essentially, you would hold a high-level meeting and have a conversation on that call of information that is very, very tasty. You're kind of creating a honeypot. And not only is it very tasty, but you would know if someone acts on it. So, for example, the example I gave a client would be to have a high-level meeting, discuss some controversial topic, and leave a private back door available to people on the call. Now, nobody on the call is actually going to go to this web address, and this web address is primarily set up for the sole purpose of seeing if anybody's paying attention, but essentially the web address would be credible. So you'd go there and you'd see stuff that, confirms that this is a secret backdoor URL address, that maybe the executives are having problems with the internet and you want to make these documents available to them. But ultimately, when someone acts on the documents, so we don't really care if they just find the link, because that could be a lot of reasons to find the link. We want to see if they act on the documents. If they act on the documents, you would have sufficient internal documentation to demonstrate at some future date that this was a honeypot, that we set this thing up on purpose to trap people. You could use video, you could use audio, you could use your legal counsel to set up the scenario so that there's a clear timeline that this was to test a system. Now, I've worked with companies in the past, and I can recommend a few to you today, that do what's called penetration testing. They can set up these honeypots, or they can test your existing systems to see if anybody can listen in. Do you have illegal recording by employees? Do you have environments where maybe their mobile phones were left open and they're accidentally called somebody, and that just happens to be in the middle of a stockholder meeting or some kind of confidential shareholder meeting? Well, there are ways to know this. You don't have to be a super spy or anything, but it's simply including structure to your meeting, and that would be your meeting minutes, thinking about how the meeting's designed, or your meeting agenda, and then, of course, meeting minutes. Think about how the meeting's designed, what level of information is appropriate to share. If the meeting was overheard, what parts of information would be sensitive? And sometimes you'll have a recording secretary or somebody who's taking minutes highlight those sensitive areas for internal review before your final minutes are written up. If you have a confidential board meeting, family office meeting, or some other meeting where you're discussing finances, you may want to test your ideas on paper without specifically describing them in the room. Now, I know this all sounds very paranoid, folks, but if you have a couple $1 million in a family trust and somebody could figure out how to get to it, criminals do this for a living. I mentioned Zoom earlier on there. 500,000 Zoom accounts were for sale on the dark web. Well, somebody's making money off of a leak, whether intentionally or unintentionally, whether it's a software bug or failure, whether it is the lack of someone setting up something that we all know shouldn't be set up that way. You wouldn't hold a confidential business meeting in the conference room of your competitors with them in the next room. You just wouldn't do that. Now, today with the Internet of Things, many devices can be turned into listening devices. Your cameras on your computers. Many examples of hackers and identity theft people using that camera to get a current valid photo identification of an individual to then use in a search online to determine the person's birth date or birth year, and also maybe their current residence and past residence, all the things that are necessary to open credit up in their name. Very often when you visit the web, if you go to, who am I on the internet? You basically go to a Google search engine and say, what's my IP address? Very often that IP address is pretty accurate for your physical location. It's within a few miles of your home, and with your name and your city and state, people can very much easily find your home personal address. Now, I'm not saying the Russians are going to bug your home. China's probably not listening in on your telephone calls, and there's probably no illegal searches on your current activities. And the majority of people are not sharing information that would be a concern. However, if you are talking about a topic that you would be embarrassed by a third party getting access to, then make sure it's not videotaped, audio recorded, or otherwise in a platform that can be easily listened in. And even if your enterprise solution is offering you encryption, make sure you have staff that know how to set it up, configure it, and monitor it. Because today it could be encrypted, but that latest patch release may have unencrypted everything, like Zoom, for example, having its 128 AES encryption as the default. Pretty much static pictures and most conversations can be extracted from the video stream. There are other situations where patents come out, for example, and these patents include lawful intercept of voice over IP. Well, you might want to be looking at what companies were involved there, what platforms are involved there, because if you can lawfully intercept something, you can also unlawfully intercept it. And if the platform isn't maintaining its patch cycles, if you're not vetting the patches before they go in place, then very often you can put yourself at risk. Now, I don't want to scare you. There are some things you can do. I gave you one example. If you have a very important high-level meeting, you can have a honeypot topic that you cover that you would know if someone acted on that information. Everybody in the room, everybody that's in the know would have a notice that it's not a valid topic. That notice would not be provided through the same email that sent the invites, because somebody could be monitoring the email. But it would be a known fact that the official minutes are the minutes to follow, and that there are topics in the meeting that may be covered contrary to core objectives. Now, you might be thinking, well, this is going to waste a bunch of time. If you've got a multi-million-dollar deal, if you've got a billion-dollar deal, it's not going to hurt to take 5 minutes and just make sure nobody's paying attention. When you're using rented spaces, for example, you can work with people to secure those spaces, but you probably don't want to have a confidential meeting at a publicly reserved space. Just like you wouldn't talk about people do talk about their personal matters at Starbucks, so don't get me wrong. You have to go a little further than that. You would want to have a company secured space that you could discuss. Now, I've worked in environments where we have skiffs and where we have somebody sweeps a room before they have a meeting. You don't necessarily have to do all that, but are you sure that no one's going to be able to interrupt, pop in or otherwise listen to a confidential or intellectual property associated conversation? And are you incorporating in your planning and your activities some small percentage of honeypot activities so that if you see an outsider move on that activity, you will actually know there's a leak? And this is done all the time in the Trump administration. It's been done in previous administrations. It is a political activity quite regularly where things are either strategically leaked or they're so absurd that when they do get leaked, you can identify who leaked them. And it's a very strategic communications element of larger businesses, high net worth individuals, and financial services firms that you want to make sure that you're doing. For example, if you're a financial services firm who handles customer accounts, seed those customer accounts with a couple fake accounts. They do it in the mailing list company, the mailing list world. They do it in other places. You seed the data list or the mailing list so that if somebody mails to an address, you know someone's illegally using that list. Or you can count the number of times that list has been used by counting the number of messages that come through. There are services to support you with this. There are auditors that can come through and verify that you've got HIPAA compliance, that you've got your SOC 3s or 2s or SOC, and all that other stuff is straight. But you got to start somewhere. You've got to have in the back of your mind at all times, if you've got intellectual property in your business, if you've got confidential negotiations or even personal information that could compromise your own financial safety or personal safety, like travel plans, be thinking about, are people listening in? If someone was listening in, what type of information may I discuss or will I discuss that could cause problems? And how do we know what's official? Because all of this, even if nobody listens in, provides you good transparency and a track record. So if something comes up in the future, you can demonstrate what was the subject of that meeting. And you're going to see this every day in politics. So you don't have to disclose the details, but at least internally you know that on a meeting last Friday, here are the 5 decisions that were made. If someone thinks a 6th decision came up, you'll be able to look at the official record and know for sure and be done with it. So there is also a practical side to this. But what I wanted to make sure you had in your hands today is a actionable insight about protecting your strategic relationships, about protecting your interests, and being aware that the technology today isn't quite what it seems to be. If they could tap into an analog phone 10 years ago, and they can tap into a digital voice over IP call 5 years ago, then I'm real sure this stuff is recorded somewhere. In fact, we see that a lot of this stuff is recorded. It's in maintenance logs. It's a bad deal if you are looking to be more secure. If you're looking for solutions to improve your strategic advantage by preventing leaks or managing strategic communications, contact us at www.insidestrategicrelations.com. We can have a private and confidential conversation about some of these topics, which of course I'm going to ask you not to disclose any proprietary details because you don't know. All calls may be recorded. Actually, all my consulting calls are recorded. But ultimately, we caveat that kind of stuff up front. Just like if you hold a meeting that discusses confidential information, you do a survey of the room to find out who's there. You do an opening brief about what you're going to cover, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate to share, and then you hold your meeting and have written minutes. So many people fail to do this. So many people have problems. You, as a member of Inside Strategic Relations, as a loyal subscriber, can ask your questions at www.insidestrategicrelations.com, and now you know better. I'm Justin Hitt with Inside Strategic Relations. Thanks for listening.